that 3 U.S. troops had been killed and dozens injured after a drone loaded with explosives struck them at a base in Jordan near the Syrian border. Now, none of that can be confirmed. The details, anyway, the location of the attack, and there's some question about whether that's true, but there is no question that American troops were killed yesterday. And the reaction to that, mixed with sadness, was highly political, in fact, even strategic. Within moments of this news breaking, Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator from South Carolina, called for blood. Quote, "Hit Iran now. Hit them hard," he tweeted. Nikki Haley, of course, piled on. Here's what she posted to X. Quote, "As a military spouse, my heart breaks for the families who lost loved ones. This shows the barbaric nature of our enemies in Iran, and it shows that they would not be attacking our troops if Joe Biden weren't so weak in his treatment of Iran. We should retaliate with full force, the full force of American strength. It's the only way to prevent further war. If we do not, these attacks will continue." Interesting. All of this came immediately. They were joined by Wes Clark, the former presidential candidate and commander of NATO, and buffoons like John Cornyn, who apparently is a senator from Texas, etc., all saying the same thing. Let's go to war with Iran. They all said this in both sides. Here's Nancy Pelosi on CNN telling you yesterday that anyone who is not for this, who would like, say, a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, is working for Vladimir Putin.
For them to call for a ceasefire is Mr. Putin's message. Mr. Putin's message. Make no mistake, this is directly connected to what he would like to see. Same thing with Ukraine. It's about Putin's message. I think some of these protesters are spontaneous and organic and sincere. Some, I think, are connected to Russia. And I say that having looked at this for a long time now, as you know.
You think some of these protests are Russian plants?
I don't think they're plants. I think some financing should be investigated. And I want to ask the FBI to investigate that.
It's hard for most people to believe that a person in his or her 80s could be evil, but she is evil, and she's speaking lies. What you heard is totally dishonest. But there's a point to the dishonesty, and that is a war with Iran, which people in Washington have been agitating for more than 20 years. So are we going to war with Iran? Are we already in a war with Iran? And if so, what are the consequences? Most Americans have no idea. It's not even something they're thinking about, but they should be. Joe Kent is a former Green Beret. He's a combat veteran who lost his wife in one of these wars. He's running for Congress in Washington State in the 3rd Congressional District, and he has an interesting and highly informed perspective on this, and we're honored to have him join us now. Joe Kent, thank you so much for coming on today. So when you see all of this, and you hate to be cynical, but you really can't be too cynical when you're dealing with the war party in Washington. It did seem like a coordinated response very quickly, moments after the announcement of the tragic death of these American servicemen. What do you make of the response from both parties in Washington to the deaths yesterday?
I mean, this whole thing, we've seen it coming, Tucker. We left our troops in these vulnerable locations, like on the Jordanian, Syrian, and Iraqi border. Our troops have been attacked, we think, at least 150 times since the October 7th incident began. And so we've seen this coming. This was an inevitable conclusion. So by leaving our troops in these locations, undefended essentially, we left them there as bait because so many people in Washington, D.C. want to go to war with Iran. They want to go to a war with Iran so badly that we will prop up the government of Iraq while the government of Iraq is completely controlled by Iran. We spend billions of dollars every single year funding, arming, training, and equipping the Iraqi government so they can turn around and support the exact same militias that just killed our troops. Biden said it himself in his statement. He accused Iranian-backed militants operating in Iraq and Syria of conducting this attack that killed the 3 Americans and wounded nearly 30 more. That is nothing short of saying the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is part of the Iraqi military that we support. So if you look at just the full scope of the way that we have arranged ourselves in the Middle East, who we're supporting and where our troops are, there's no other logical conclusion other than the fact that we have left them there as bait to be killed by Iranians at the time and place of their choosing so that we can continue to escalate towards a conflict with Iran. And like you said, there was a very coordinated series of talking points that came out almost immediately that we need to go and strike back against Iran. And look, we do need to strike back. We can't just let this go unanswered. But if we start taking strikes inside of Iran itself, that is exactly what the Iranian regime wants. They will benefit from that. If we start attacking Iran the way that we attacked Iraq, the way we attacked Afghanistan, then the Iranian government, the Iranian mullahs, the Ayatollah, the people will rally around them in support. We should be taking calculated strikes back at Iranian proxy groups for self-defense, and then we should immediately get our troops out of these foolish locations before we lose more blood and treasure for absolutely nothing in the Middle East, and before we're sucked further into a regional war.
So if we could just go back to something you said at the beginning, which I think is demonstrably true, that American policymakers have left American citizens in these countries in order to be killed so they can justify killing more American citizens in a broader war against a very well-armed country, Iran. If that is true, that's evil. That's a crime. And by the way, I should say, because you almost never say it, that your wife was killed in one of those countries as one of those people. You ran for Congress. You almost never mentioned it. Perhaps it's too painful, and I'm sorry to bring it up now. But, I mean, you have lived this. So how is that not a crime?
It's 100% a crime, Tucker. Look, I lost my wife a month after Trump gave the order for our troops to be withdrawn from Syria because Trump ran on defeating the Islamic Caliphate, ISIS, and that needed to be done. Unfortunately, ISIS was a byproduct of the Iraq war, the invasion, and all the blunders that we made there. But Trump inherited that problem. We had to deal with it. We had to go take out the caliphate. We did that in very short order. Trump gave the order to withdraw. And that's when the DC war machine, which unfortunately is controlled by Republicans and Democrats and even more powerful unelected bureaucrats, turned against Trump to leave our troops there. And she was killed. And a lot of the justification for leaving our troops in Syria and in Iraq has been to prevent so-called Iranian influence, malign Iranian influence, to counter Russia. And that is nothing more than us baiting a trap for ourselves to get our troops killed, to encourage and then really to justify a further war against Iran. It's absolute insanity. And we have to ask ourselves as American citizens, what do we gain from this? If we're going to deploy our troops and we're going to lose our best and our brightest, and we're going to spend trillions of dollars, what do we, the American people, gain? At the same time, we just lost 3 Americans defending the Jordanian-Syrian border. Our border is wide open. Fentanyl's killing over 118,000 of our citizens. 10 million illegal invaders have come into our country. So where are the priorities of our ruling class? And I think it's absolutely evil. I think it's completely and totally treasonous. And we need to get these people out of office as soon as possible.
Well, it's also, there's something bigger, it seems to me. I have no evidence, but just watching, there's like a spirit of insanity or delusion that's descended on Washington. It's almost like ergotism or something you read about in the Middle Ages where the whole village goes crazy and commits cannibalism. I mean, here you have, for just one example, John Cornyn, who's a senator from Texas, whose state is being invaded by millions of people. You can't get your child into the NICU in Texas hospitals. You can't use the emergency room in Texas hospitals because they're full of people breaking our laws from foreign countries. So Texas is collapsing under the weight of this. And John Cornyn's entire day is spent worrying about the territorial integrity of foreign countries. Like, how do you explain that? It can't just be payoffs from Lockheed, or maybe it is. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, I think a lot of it is this deeply entrenched mentality in Washington, D.C., which most certainly has financial interests assigned to it. However, I do think there is a lot of people, and a lot of them, like you pointed out, like Nancy Pelosi, are in their 80s, and they've always thought this way, this with us or against us mentality that says, like, hey, you're either for the next war, the most current war and the current thing, or you're with the terrorists. You just are kowtowing to Vladimir Putin. It's the exact same mentality that got us into the Iraq war. You're either with us or you're with the terrorists. And look, Tucker, I would love to come on here and defend neoconservatism as someone who, lost my late wife in these wars, as somebody who lost countless friends, as somebody who fought myself 11 combat deployments. I spent most of my 20s and 30s in Iraq. I would love to tell you it had worked, but it simply did not. And that's a very hard thing to admit. I get into arguments all the time with fellow veterans about this exact same topic. So I think a lot of this is literally the gambler's fallacy. There's a lot of people who think, hey, if we just keep trying, if we keep attempting to spread freedom through the barrel of a gun and trillions of US dollars, this time it's going to work. Let's just double down. And this is, well, how really nice casinos are built in Las Vegas off of this exact same mentality. So I think that combined with the financial interest from Lockheed Martin and every single defense contractor, and putting someone like Lloyd Austin as the Secretary of Defense, who's still on the board at Raytheon, I think that factor with that mentality and people not being able to admit that we got this wrong and then making adjustments to our policy, I think that gets us in this current situation, because it's actually challenging to thread the needle. Like, where do we go from here? We can't just let the Iranians attack and kill our people.
Right.
But at the same time, we know if we go to war with Iran, this is going to be a disaster. There's no data that says like, hey, maybe if we just go to our war with Iran this time, it's going to work out great. We've actually got to assess the past mistakes that we made, make adjustments, and then chart a more pragmatic way forward. But at the same time, not lose sight of what's happening in our own country. I don't go anywhere in my district in Washington State without someone telling me a personal story about how the fentanyl crisis has affected them, how the wide open southern border is literally killing members of their family. So we need to prioritize. This whole idea that we can be at war with the entire world is absolutely absurd, while at the same time not prioritizing our own nation. We've got to get our priorities in order.
I've always wondered how someone like you must feel, who, as you just said, spent a good part of your life on 11 combat deployments and lost your own wife in these wars, when you're denounced as a tool of Vladimir Putin, or in the last race you ran, neocons subverted your message by claiming you were a CIA operative when you were arguing against the CIA's paramilitary involvement in these countries. I mean, the whole thing was so dishonest. But how does it make you feel? I don't think you need to prove your loyalty to this country. You already have. To be denounced in public as a traitor to your country.
When it happens the first, somewhere around the first 10 to 100 times, it hurts and it makes you really mad. And then you get in this effort to prove why you're not what they say you are. I'm not a Nazi because, I'm not a Vladimir Putin puppet because. But then you know what? Actually, or somewhere around the 101st time and the 1000th time, you can only laugh at it because it's so preposterous. The people that are arguing that we should forfeit our own territorial integrity for the territorial integrity of, I don't know, Ukraine or the Jordanian border, those are the people that will call us traitors, especially when the vast majority of them arguing for this have never had any skin in the game. As a matter of fact, I think the vast majority of them don't know anyone personally who went over and fought these wars. So there's something liberating in being called that repeatedly over and over again, because then you can truly see things for the way that they are, that this is literally just propaganda to attempt to intimidate people, to shut them up. And I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, and you give us a platform where we can actually speak truth to power and show people what's actually happening in this country and how our foreign policy establishment is absolutely just really destroying the United States of America. They're attempting to make us sacrifice our republic for an empire that does nothing for the American people.
Amen. So nicely put. And I would recommend, the famous Eisenhower speech at the end of his term around 1960. Or 61, the military-industrial complex, which is worth watching. So let me just ask you one last question, because he called it 60 years ago. You referred to what a war with Iran would do to the United States, and I don't know that a lot of people in this country fully understand what Iran is as a nation state. It's not Afghanistan. What do you think the immediate and then longer-term effects of a war with Iran would be on the United States?
Immediately, it would be very bloody. I have no doubt that we could probably defeat some of their air defense and go in there and have another shock and awe campaign. But again, like we saw how the shock and awe campaign in Iraq really didn't actually work in the long run. So I have no doubt that we'd have some immediate results that people would cheer about here in the United States. But Iran, Persia has always been an empire. It's been around longer than any of the other players in the modern Middle East right now, and they are not going anywhere. And right now, Iran has a lot of internal problem. They have a lot of internal strife with the Ayatollah and that government that's only been in power since 1979. But again, if we start conducting strikes in Iran, everyone in Iran will rally around their leader and they will become even more revolutionary. And then we will have Iranian proxies throughout the entire region that will be conducting attacks just like we had in Jordan. And really, in the long term, Tucker, the axis that has been built really since Putin invaded Russia and we decided that, since Putin invaded Ukraine and we decided we were going to throw this massive sanctions package at them, China has come in as a major player, and we are deeply compromised by China. They control a lot of our economy. They control global manufacturing. They're deeply embedded in Wall Street, and they've also made deals with the Iranians. They want access to Iranian petro, not to mention the fact that Biden killed off U.S. energy independence, and now he's going after LNG, and the world's biggest LNG exporters are Iran, Russia, and Qatar. So this axis would become very powerful. If we get deeply involved and deeply entangled with Iran, we are playing right into China's hands, because China would like nothing more than for us to be committing our military industrial base to a war in Eastern Europe, in Ukraine, and then to be committing our conventional military power, our blood and our treasure, back in the Middle East. That will make the Pacific, our actual border, extremely vulnerable to Chinese aggression, or China will simply just watch us bleed out economically as we bleed out on the battlefield on these couple different theaters. It's absolute insanity. It's opening up Pandora's box. And again, for what gain to the American people?
I mean, I think that's the most reasonable, common sense based, factual assessment I've seen of this from anyone. And the fact that you're not in Congress tells you a lot about the forces you're up against. But Godspeed. Joe Kent, thank you for summing that up for us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tucker. I really appreciate it.
Are very serious things happening in the banking sector that's in other parts of the economy. Credit Suisse, as we said, is in trouble tonight. David Sachs will explain why this is happening and what it means. He joins us next. So in less than a week, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed and Signature Bank, and of course everybody is concerned that this is part of a trend that will really tank the U.S. economy. Then today, shares in Credit Suisse hit an all-time low. The bank has been struggling for a while now, for several years. Last year, Credit Suisse reported an annual net loss of $8 billion, the largest since 2008. Late today, the Swiss National Bank said it will support Credit Suisse. So that's good, apparently, maybe, but the overall picture is scary. So how did this happen? What exactly are we watching? We thought it'd be nice to be joined by someone who's been in this world for a long time. David Sachs is the co-founder and partner of Craft Ventures, also the co-founder of PayPal and host of the All In podcast. He joins us tonight. David, thank you so much for coming on. I'm just going to stand back and let you explain what you think is causing this.
Well, Tucker, I think what's going on here, there's a bunch of issues that were particular to Credit Suisse. They've had a series of scandals and compliance issues and exec changes over the past few years. But there is a common pattern here with what's happening in the U.S. banking system, which is these banks are under tremendous stress right now. And if there's weaknesses at these banks, they're getting flushed out and exposed, and deposits are leaving the system very quickly, causing these banks to be imperiled, and then potentially creating the risk of the next cascading failure, because all these banks are sort of interlinked, and this is where you get sort of systemic risk. So what is causing this stress? I would posit that the reason for the stress is that we've had this rate tightening cycle for the last year. It's the fastest time that interest rates have been hiked by the Fed in our entire lifetimes. And what caused that? It was the worst inflation in 40 years. So this is basically what is putting tremendous stress on the whole banking system, is that rates have gone up so violently and so suddenly that deposits are leaving because they're going to other alternatives like money market funds, but also assets on the books that were supposed to be safe, like long-dated bonds, T-bills, mortgage bonds. All of a sudden, they've become toxic assets. They were supposed to be safe assets. Now they're basically toxic. And I think that everybody's trying to understand how deep this problem goes. And it's good in a sense that, you know, whether it's the Swiss government or the Fed is kind of taking steps to intervene and prevent a total run on the banks. I think that's good. But the problem is we've had such bad Fed policy for the last number of years now that it's entirely too little too late. And that's what makes the situation really scary.
So I think you described it well. Back to inflation. We had scary inflation just about a year ago. What caused that inflation? Let's go even farther back, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, it's really simple. What causes inflation is money printing and excessive spending. We had trillions and trillions of dollars being spent and printed out of Washington. And this started even before the Biden administration. Biden really took it to a new level. Remember, in the first quarter of his presidency, we had that American Rescue Plan, which is $2 trillion of COVID relief that we didn't need because COVID was winding down. And the economy had already recovered and was hot. And that's why even Larry Summers warned him at the time. Economists of their own party said, listen, this risks inflation. And sure enough, the inflation came just 4 months later. And what did they do? They said it was transitory. It was a big lie. Yellen and Powell and Biden all said that this is transitory so they could keep spending more money. And the Fed kept printing and QE continued for another 6 months. I would posit that 6 months really created the bubble of 2021. The markets got super frothy. That's when tons of sort of hot deposits went into SVB and other banks. And it took the risk to another level. I mean, in other words, these guys ran the economy at 150 miles an hour, and then they slammed on the brakes. And what you're seeing now is the resulting car crash. And the only thing we don't know is whether this is a 2-car crash or a 20-car pileup on the highway. And, if they had just acted last summer or that summer of 2021, when we first got that inflation print of 5.1%, if they had said, okay, we have a problem, this is not transitory, it's real. If they had started raising rates then, they could have done it more gradually. We would have had a lot more time, and we wouldn't have needed such a violent cycle of interest rate hikes that have now basically caused this enormous stress on the banking system.
It's so nicely put. Thank you for bringing it back to that, because all of this feels like the product of distortion of our economy by Washington, and it sounds like it was. David Sachs, appreciate your coming on.
Thanks, Tucker.
So among the many lies, it's hard even to keep track of all the lies, but Joe Biden's DHS secretary has told us repeatedly the border is completely secure. But now the chief of the Border Patrol just contradicted that in the starkest possible terms. For that story, Fox's Trace Gallagher joins us now. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, he could not have been more clear if he stood on top of the Paso del Norte bridge in El Paso and yelled, liar, liar. It is a quadruple blow to the Biden administration because Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz defied DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas and President Biden by saying this.
Does DHS have operational control of our entire border?
No, sir.
You heard the secretary. He said we have operational control. That's the definition of operational control.
Based upon the definition you have, sir, up there, no.
We don't have operational control.
No, sir.
And there was more. Chief Ortiz also said the border is not secure. He defended horseback agents who President Biden accused of whipping Haitian migrants. And then he offered a final spike in the heart by simultaneously coming after this administration and supporting the previous administration, saying it was a mistake to stop building the wall, Trump's wall. Chief Ortiz also pleaded for Congress to give him more border agents and asked for the tools to deliver consequences. That's important, right? Because for 26 months, millions of migrants have crossed the border and received zero consequences. The chief told lawmakers this fiscal year alone, 385,000 illegal immigrants have evaded Border Patrol. Those are people that border agents tried to catch but didn't, the gotaways. And an additional 79,000 snuck into the country completely undetected. The final blow might be the chief's language, where, contrary to Secretary Mayorkas, Ortiz referred to the border situation as a, quote, crisis. Much more on this tonight on Fox News at Night, Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks so much for that story. You bet. So it turns out Joe Biden has been pro-gay marriage since the 1950s. Really? Imagine what Joe Biden's attitudes really were in the 1950s. Anyway, we have tape that shows that's not true. Plus, a lifeguard in Long Beach just saved the life of a puppy who was swept out to sea. Happy news in our great country. The lifeguard who did it and the dog. Join us next. Chase McCall is a Marine safety officer with the fire department in Long Beach. He just finished washing some trucks along the beach when someone told him about a dog in the water. The dog was called Tofu, and he'd been swept several hundred yards offshore into the Pacific. So Chase McCall got onto his paddleboard and wetsuit and rescued the dog. He had help from another Marine safety officer called Devin Beebe, who guided McCall to the dog with her binoculars. Chase McCall joins us tonight with the dog he rescued, Tofu. Thank you both. Thank you both for coming on. So Chase, how far out was this dog?
I would say Tofu is swimming maybe 200 to 300 yards out offshore.
What Tofu doesn't look like a retrieving dog, for example. Like, how did Tofu get 300 yards offshore? Do you know?
I heard reports from just beach patrons that they had been chasing her around trying to catch her for about an hour or so in the parking lot, and
oh wow!
I guess she just jumped in the water and took off towards out to sea.
How did she respond when you tried to pull her onto your paddleboard?
I think she was grateful to see me there and a little relieved. She looked a little tired and cold and came right up to me and made it easy for me to grab her and put her on the board.
So dogs dogs famously know how to swim at birth, but they can drown, right?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Is this common? Have you rescued other dogs from the Pacific?
We've had a few incidences where we've rescued dogs from the water. Yeah, so it happens not too often, but it does happen for us.
What did the owner say when you brought Tofu back?
So we didn't really talk to the owner until the next day. So we handed Tofu off to Animal Care Services, and through social media, the owner was able to get the contact info on where she was being held. And so the next day when I met the owner, they were really grateful, and just everyone was so happy that this was a success story.
Are you a dog lover?
I am.
I can tell by the way you touch that dog. Good for you. Chase McCall, thank you so much for coming on tonight. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So something really scary is going on with our banking system. Lindsey Graham is pushing us to war in Russia. So naturally, Joe Biden is giving interviews to Comedy Central about gay marriage. Now, here's Biden's latest claim, which is pretty funny, actually. He claimed that he started supporting gay marriage in the United States when he saw two men kissing in Wilmington, Delaware in the early 1960s, because in the early 1960s in Wilmington, Delaware, that kind of thing happened all the time. Dudes were just making out everywhere. Here's Joe Biden.
I can remember exactly where my epiphany was.
Okay.
Hadn't thought much about it, to tell you the truth. And I was a senior in high school, and my dad was dropping me off. And I remember about to get out of the car, and I looked to my right, and two well-dressed men in suits kissed each other. I mean, they gave each other a kiss. And then one looked like he was heading to the DuPont building, and one looked like he headed to the Hercules Corporation building. And I'll never forget, I turned and looked at my dad. He said, "Joey, it's simple. They love each other."
It's 1959 in Wilmington. Two men are just kissing each other on the street, and Joe Biden's dad, who sold used cars, said to him, "Joey, it's simple. They love each other." And of course, Nelson Mandela was in the car too, just kind of elevating the moral tone. What are the chances that Joe Biden would have thrown a beer bottle, a full beer bottle, at those dudes had they existed? Right around 100%, we would think. Obviously, it's a lie. And we know it's a lie, in fact, because Biden gave interviews, well, more recently than 60 years ago. He explained that actually he's totally opposed to gay marriage. And we have the tape. Here's Biden from 2006.
We already have a law, the Defense of Marriage Act, where we've all voted, not where I voted and others said, look, marriage is between a man and a woman, and states must respect that. Nobody's violated that law. There's been no challenge to that law. Why do we need a constitutional amendment? Marriage is between a man and a woman.
Ooh, he's mad. What kind of screaming nasty bigot do you think Joe Biden was 60 years ago? Chances of that are very, very high. In fact, 100%. Vince Coglianese hosts the Vince Coglianese Show in Washington, D.C., justifiably popular. He joins us tonight. So he was kind of a pioneer in the late 1950s on gay marriage, kind of. Joey, they love each other. What do you think of that, Vince?
They love each other. It only took him 50 years to work up the courage to stop being a regressive bigot and finally admit that in 2012. If we go back, see, he is interesting because he offered us a couple of interesting data points in this that demonstrate that this is a complete lie. And I saw the Washington Post fact checker tried to check this and then said, we can't render any Pinocchios because there's just no way to prove it or disprove it. I will help you. Okay, I'm going to help the Washington Post now. In the audio that you just played, He claimed that he was being dropped off at high school in his senior year. That would be 1961, Archmere Academy. He sees two men kiss. He turns to his father, bewildered, and his father says, they love each other, Joey. And then they stare at the men as they walk their separate ways, one to the DuPont building in Wilmington, Delaware, the other one to the Hercules building in Wilmington, Delaware. I have some landmarks for you to look at, and what I discovered is that the DuPont building is 7.1 miles away from his high school. So in other words, he was dropped off 7 miles away from high school. There's no way this happened. The Hercules building, for that matter, the version of it that's in Wilmington now was built in 1983. This is he's adding all sorts of details that help demonstrate that he's lying. And by the way, Tucker, he's told this story many times, but every time he adds new details. Sometimes he's the father in the story. Sometimes he's applying to become a lifeguard. Sometimes he's just sitting with his dad and having a grand old time, and they're watching the men kiss and learning about life. And I guess I was wondering if there is one speaking as an Italian American, if there's a chance that this is true in this sense. Wilmington, Delaware is an Italian American place, or it has been in the past. Maybe he just saw two Italian American dudes kissing each other in 1961, a greeting between brothers, or the kiss of death, a la the Godfather Part 2, Michael Corleone saying, "I know it was you, Fredo," and he kissed him, both in a well-dressed suit.
But every story that Biden tells puts himself, of course, at the center of it. He's always the hero, fighting for civil rights in South Africa and Wilmington, Delaware 60 years ago. But this seems to me like the behavior of someone who was actually kind of guilty about how he behaved in 1961 in Wilmington. Like, what are the chances that he was like the most prolific user of racial slurs?
There's
in
no
Wilmington, Delaware.
Question. Was Joe Biden retrograde in 1961? Absolutely. There's no question about it. His career involved his close relationship with segregationists and former members of the Ku Klux Klan. Like, it's not like he was like some great enlightened thinker in 1960. There's really something to this gay marriage thing. No, in congressional testimony, he suggested that gay people were a security risk to the country by being in the military, and that was much more recently than 1961.
No, he didn't say it's love. The sad thing is that there are people who will believe that. MSNBC viewers obviously believe anything. Sad. Vince, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
So equity isn't just for banks or the Pentagon, also medicine, the largest organization representing surgeons, has now declared that surgery is racist. One surgeon joins us to respond next.
Nobody ever looks at somebody and says, I'm totally interested in what your future looks like to you. Okay? I want to see you break your future down into a million little pieces and then get those pieces one little step at a time. And here's how we're going to do it. So I want you to draw what your favorite house might look like. And then I want you to draw your favorite mode of transportation, car, bike, truck, whatever. And then I want you to draw your favorite give back moment, your charity moment. If you had an extra $100, what would you do with it? Time, talent, and treasure. What would you give away, right? Now I want you to draw your favorite pet. Dog, cat, what color, what would you name it? Let's talk about your favorite vacation. Now I want you to draw your health moment and your spiritual moment. Let's draw this out on a poster board and keep it in front of you because, Tucker, only 1% of the population is willing to go that far. So why shouldn't I be the employer who says, I'm going to force the issue and turn you into a 1% person, right? Because so many people, 8 out of 10 people can't name a goal that they have for themselves.
Yeah.
The other 2 out of 10, or I said, let's say 20 out of 100, 16 of those never write their goals down. 4 of them do. Only 1 of them writes them down and puts those up on the wall so they can see them every day. Well, that's what I do. I said, if you're going to work here, if you're going to spend your time here, if you're going to earn money here because it's hard, then you should reward yourself and benefit from this. So let's put something out there that you can see the progress of you gaining the picture that is called your life. It's like a puzzle, and you just start filling it in. And I got to tell you, after they get their first goal, I don't care if it's paying off a low balance Visa card. Get out of the way because they go crazy. They become goal-oriented machines after that. And it's only because they see themselves gaining on their own life, regardless of what you're doing.
That man is Ken Rusk. He took what is now considered an unconventional path, might be coming back into fashion. That conversation is on Fox Nation right now. So equity, a poorly defined idea, has taken over and completely changed huge parts of the United States. Banking, air travel. You don't want equity in medicine, do you? Particularly in surgery. Well, it's there now. The American College of Surgeons has just declared itself to be a tool of white supremacy, suggesting that surgery itself may be racist. They say that patients should have their surgeries done by doctors from their racial group, as it was done during Jim Crow. What should we think of this? Well, Dr. Richard Boshart is a surgeon. He practices at Boshart and Marzik Plastic Surgery Associates, and he has a really thoughtful op-ed in the Wall Street Journal describing what's happening. Doctor, thank you for coming on tonight, for being willing to do this. So why should we be concerned by these ideas entering medicine?
Tucker, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm sitting here and I'm a little bit in disbelief that I'm even here.
Yes.
Don't take this incorrectly or wrongly, but I almost wish I didn't have to be.
Well, I agree.
I am a plastic surgeon, once also board certified by the American Board of General Surgery. And I've been practicing for over 33 years. Last year, I was banned for life from access to members of the American College of Surgeons on their online discussion forums. The ACS, for people that don't know, is the largest organization and also the oldest in the world, representing surgeons and also surgical patients. The mission of the ACS, which was written into their initial mission statement to serve all with skill and trust, has since been changed. They were supposed to be promoting excellence in surgery and supporting surgeons and their patients. Unfortunately, this is no longer true. My ban occurred because 2 years ago, I noticed that there was a direction of the ACS to try to jump onto this systemic racism bandwagon that seems to be very popular these days. The ACS leadership went to war against itself. It declared the ACS, the American College of Surgeons, to be structurally racist. It also went on to say that surgeons are racists, and even the practice of surgery is racist. What this did is it produced a type of messaging that now states that, as you clearly put, it's best if patients are treated by surgeons of their own race. Tucker, let me ask you a question. If you are looking for a surgeon for yourself and a loved one, or a loved one, what are you looking for in a surgeon?
Skill. Yeah.
Skill, absolutely. What about trust?
Of course.
I would say that after skill, probably the single most important thing that goes into providing good medicine is trust.
Yes.
A patient has to trust that a surgeon is not only competent and skilled, but also has their best interest at heart and will do the best for them. A surgeon, on the other hand, has to also trust the patient, that they will understand that the surgeon is doing his or her best.
Yes.
And
Dr. Boshart, I wish we had more time. I hope you'll come back for a much longer conversation, because I think this matters more than almost anything else. And I appreciate your bravery coming on tonight. We'll be right back. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson. Tonight has been a tough couple of years for the experts when it comes to big public policy questions, complicated adult stuff like war and disease and the economy, really the only things that matter. The assumption in Washington has for many years been that you should not worry about it. Don't sweat the details. That's not your role as a citizen and as a voter. We don't have that kind of democracy, the kind where you might actually participate. No, your job is to trust the experts and their conclusions and then obey them. But COVID kind of blew that up. If there's one thing we learned from that disaster, it's that public policy experts very often had no clue what they were talking about. Your hippie aunt in Mendocino County knew a lot more about how to beat a flu virus than your average virologist on CNN. Your aunt would tell you to go outside, get some exercise, some sunlight, some fresh air, stop eating junk food, turn off your computer once in a while, spend time with other people. Be healthy. That advice worked. The experts, by contrast, made you get the vaccine, and that did not work. So by March of 2021, people are starting to figure this out. Anyone who was paying attention in America understood that the experts, many of them, were full of it. And it was exactly at that moment that the Atlantic magazine in Washington published a piece pushing back against the growing consensus. That story was entitled, "Following Your Gut Isn't the Right Way to Go." It's hard to think of a funnier headline, really, mostly because it's so spectacularly absurd. You should always trust your gut, obviously. It is the one thing that will never betray you. But the Atlantic magazine wanted you to know that your natural instincts are, in fact, worthless. The experts had a rough year, the magazine conceded, but we still have to trust them. Right. Actually, we don't have to trust them. And on big questions of public policy, we absolutely should not trust them. It's a democracy. But Washington is continuing to demand that we do trust them. Why? There may be a reason. Maybe COVID isn't the only big project they have in mind for us. A project the experts will justify on MSNBC. And indeed it's not. There is the climate change agenda. And the climate change agenda is the single most ambitious effort to remake human civilization in all recorded history. And it's coming. In fact, it's already in progress. The only reason that millions and millions of Americans aren't protesting in the streets tonight over this effort to completely overturn their lives is that on some level, many people still do trust the experts, at least on climate change. But should they? We were pondering that this morning when we saw that the world's most famous climate change expert, Greta Thunberg of Sweden, just deleted a tweet she wrote in June of 2018. Here it is, quote, "A top climate scientist is warning that climate change will wipe out all of humanity unless we stop using fossil fuels over the next 5 years. The scientist, of course, was a Harvard professor, so obviously that prediction was going to be correct. But here we are, still driving our Silverados and still alive, and some of us are still happy. So it does make you wonder if Greta Thunberg, the greatly revered Greta Thunberg, a perennial finalist for the Nobel Peace Prize, could have gotten that so wrong. What else have the climate experts gotten wrong? And how long have they been getting it wrong? Well, fortunately, the Competitive Enterprise Institute has done the research on this, and it turns out these people have been very wrong for a very long time. 1969, the New York Times was printing climate hysteria from an expert called Paul Ehrlich. Quote, "We must realize that unless we are extremely lucky, everybody will disappear in a cloud of blue steam in 20 years. That was Paul Ehrlich in 1969. Well, here it is, 2023, and that same Paul Ehrlich, who's now 90 and still publishing books and still being cited on 60 Minutes, is still telling us that we're all going to die. Now, clearly, Paul Ehrlich had some sort of traumatic childhood he's been inflicting on the rest of us for over 50 years. And for over 50 years, his fellow experts have taken him seriously. Now, back then, of course, climate change didn't mean global warming, it meant a new ice age. In 1970, the Boston Globe reported, quote, "Scientists predict a new ice age by 21st century. According to the Globe, air pollution may obliterate the sun and cause a new ice age in the first third of the next century." An ice age. In 1972, Brown University's science department sent a letter to the White House explaining that they had deep concern with the future of the world because this ice age falls within the rank of processes which produced the last ice age. 2 years later, in 1974, The Guardian reported that, quote, "Spy satellites show new ice age is coming fast." And the report cited, just for moral weight, analysis carried out at Columbia University. Then, a few years later, 1977, the actor Leonard Nimoy, who was not a science expert technically, but played one at one point on television, shot this video.
"We are unprepared for the next advance. The result could be hunger and death on a scale unprecedented in all of history. What scientists are telling us now is that the threat of an ice age is not as remote as they once thought. During the lifetime of our grandchildren, Arctic cold and perpetual snow could turn most of the inhabitable portions of our planet into a polar desert."
Hunger and death on an unprecedented scale. Someone else with the tragic childhood he inflicted on the rest of us. But by the early 1980s, when the ice didn't arrive, well, the experts decided the problem wasn't too much cold, it was too much heat. It was global warming. In 1989, the Associated Press ran this story, quote, "A senior UN environmental official says entire nations could be wiped off the face of the earth by rising sea levels if global warming trend is not reversed by the year 2000. In other words, 23 years ago. That same year, 1989, a climate expert called Jim Hansen met with a reporter from Ceylon. According to Ceylon, Hansen explained that within 20 or 30 years, quote, the West Side Highway, which runs along the Hudson River in Manhattan, will be underwater. Underwater. We checked tonight, and actually it's congested, but still a road. Then in March of 2000, the Independent newspaper ran a piece explaining that snowfalls are now just a thing of the past. And we're quoting, snow is starting to disappear from our lives. The piece quoted a climate expert claiming that, quote, children just aren't going to know what snow is. No idea what snow is. It'll be a relic not of the Ice Age, but of the great inferno of global warming. Then, in 2004, amazingly, civilization still existed. The Guardian predicted that, quote, major European cities will be sunk beneath rising seas as Britain is plunged into a Siberian climate by 2020, which is a little confusing because global warming doesn't typically produce a Siberian climate. And it was around this time that they decided, hey, we don't want to get pinned down on the details. Will it be too hot? Will it be too cold? We don't want to say. Something bad's going to happen, so we're going to call it climate change. And that paved the way for Al Gore, who in 2006 released his famous documentary, An Inconvenient Truth. And the beauty of An Inconvenient Truth is, now that it's been, well, inconveniently more than 15 years since it came out, we can fact-check its claims. Here's the trailer. Al Gore also said there would be no ice in the Arctic. He quoted researchers, climate researchers, experts, and he explained that, quote, the North Pole will be ice-free in the summer by 2013 because of man-made global warming. Now, it does take a certain level of chutzpah to make a prediction that precise, and Al Gore made many of them, and all of them turned out to be wrong. And for a normal person, that would be a cue, maybe it's time to retire. I'm rich on Google stock, maybe I could just stop talking because, of course, I've been disgraced by my own foolish predictions. But no, he kept going. And he was helped in that by the entire news media. It makes you wonder why. News organizations exist to bring you the news, to assess whether things are true or not. But if all of them collude to hide lying, you have to ask, is there something else going on here? We'll let you decide. We do know that by 2006, NBC News informed the world that, quote, a leading U.S. climate researcher says the world has a 10-year window till 2016, a window of opportunity to take decisive action on global warming and avert catastrophe. Well, of course, by their predicted date, Donald Trump became president, but that's not what they were predicting. In 2008, the Associated Press reported that according to a top NASA scientist, in 5 to 10 years, the Arctic will be free of sea ice in the summer. That didn't happen, but of course no one was ever held to account for bad predictions, so they just kept going. John Kerry, now our climate czar, cited that very same science in 2009. Watch.
You have sea ice, which is melting at a rate that the Arctic Ocean now increasingly is exposed. In 5 years, scientists predict we will have the first ice-free Arctic summer.
What's hilarious is this is a guy who's never had a job. He's only been in politics. He's never done one useful thing. He's not a scientist. He's never done research. He's actually not an expert, but because he's way more aggressive than you are, and because he has access to the media, which amplify his claims, he poses as one. Now, what's strange about the prediction you just heard is that John Kerry's prediction contradicts Barack Obama's famous climate prediction from a year earlier. You probably remember this.
This was the moment when the rise of the oceans began to slow and our planet began to heal.
Sad to watch that. All the cheering people, they seem so sincere. He's going to save the world. He can control the weather. He's Jesus. But in fact, the global healing Obama promised at the beginning of his first term never came, and neither did the global destruction. Here, by the way, is Neil deGrasse Tyson, another great predictor of things, saying that by 2014, the Statue of Liberty will soon be underwater.
You know what I tell people? This wakes them into. Here in the New York metropolitan area, I say, if we lose the ice caps, you know how high the water will be? I say, maybe a couple of feet. No, it would come up to the Statue of Liberty's elbow, the one that's holding the Declaration of Independence. That's where the waterline will be.
That man's a scientist. And of course, climate does change. It has always changed. In fact, the landscape we live in now is formed by climate change. The glaciers are a product of climate change. The climate is changing now. It never stops changing. That is a process that we didn't cause and that we can't control to any great degree. We'll never be able to control. And there are upsides to it and downsides to it. By the way, if the Earth is indeed getting warmer, and it seems to be, well, then that will make more arable land in places like Canada and Northern Europe. So, like everything in this life, in the temporal world, it's a mixed blessing. But you only hear the downsides, which tells you a lot. It tells you this is not science, it's manipulation. These aren't reports from the experts, these are threats. Here's Joe Biden.
That's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger. The latest climate report, nothing less than, quote, code red for humanity. Let me say it again. Code red for humanity.
Code red for humanity. Of course, he never explains what that means. You're going to have to check your book of science to find out. Of course, in the details, they don't offer as many details now because they've all been wrong. But to the extent they do, they are provably wrong over time. So the question is, why are we still being bullied by these people? It has nothing to do with saving the Earth. They hate the Earth. They hate nature. It's about controlling us, and maybe we should recognize that. Chris Horner is the author of Red Hot Lies, How Global Warming Alarmists Use Threats, Frauds, and Deception to Keep You Misinformed. He joins us tonight. Mr. Horner, thank you for coming on. So it does seem like
thank you, Tucker.
We're complicit. The public is complicit in this. I mean, they keep telling you the same dumb things. If they keep being wrong, no one holds them to account. And we're like, oh, yeah, you get to control the thermostat of my house. Or you take the wood stove away from me, and I accept that. Maybe it's our fault. Lies.
That's a very good point. Fear sells, and everyone knows it. Fear can be used to get what you want, and we forget that blaming your neighbor for the weather is centuries old. Witch burnings, of course, when crops failed because it got cold, and warming used to be called optima, but politicians seized upon it, of course. Yeah, they supported, they underwrote activists who agitated for policies that businesses who were also underwriting the activists would profit from, and that's you know, the world's second oldest profession. It's a pretty typical Washington play. It just slipped the leash, very scaled up, and now we have this millenarian death cult where kids say, you're going to die from old age, but I'm going to die from climate change. It's almost a mantra. Why do we keep falling for it? One of the more tragic episodes of this, besides what's happening to two generations now, is that our elected leaders continue to march to this tune despite everything you just showed. And by the way, well done. How does anyone watch this and then demand their elected official pretend they can control the weather, cede the freedoms that you don't want to use? Carol Bronner once said, if we control your thermostat, we'll be giving you a choice and a role in what you do. It'll be a savings to you. We'll scare you, we'll promise savings in this, and then gloss it up with some global salvationism. Why do we keep falling for it? And incidentally, we're seeing, you know, we're seeing blackouts were to be viewed as the new normal. Energy rationing, well, we have to do it for these reasons. This is utter lunacy with visible social, economic, and human consequences now, terrible ones just over the horizon. And yet we see what you just showed. I grew up with those Leonard Nimoy specials. How does this keep happening?
Sure. Right. How is Paul Ehrlich, the emotionally damaged non-scientist Paul Ehrlich, still telling us everyone's going to die when he made it to 90? Which is amazing. Everything is irony. Chris Horner, great to see you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the FBI doesn't seem to have made a lot of progress figuring out how the Biden family made all that money from foreign governments and was it legal or not. But Congressman Jamie Comer of Kentucky, has been looking into it as a new committee chairman, and he found that Hallie Biden, the widow of Beau Biden, Hunter Biden's ex-girlfriend, received a $35,000 cut of a $3 million payout from China. It was part of a deal that Hunter Biden made, associate of Hunter Biden made, with a Chinese state energy company. Hunter Biden's legal team came out with a statement today and said, quote, Hunter is a private citizen with every right to pursue his own business endeavors, joined several business partners in seeking a joint venture with a privately owned legitimate energy company in China. So that's his attorney's position. Miranda Devine is one of the world's experts on this question. She is the author of the book Laptop from Hell, and she joins us now to assess. Miranda, thank you so much for coming on. So what do you think Jamie Comer is going to find here? What do you think of Hunter Biden's attorney's statement?
Thanks, Tucker. This clearly Hunter Biden's lawyers are trying to say that this money, these two tranches of $3 million that went to Rob Walker, a Hunter Biden business associate and friend, was seed money, was sort of prepayment for future work to be done. That's ridiculous. Tony Bobulinski has said, and he was involved in these deals, Hunter Biden's former business partner, and there's ample evidence on the laptop to show that Hunter Biden and his business partners were doing work for this Chinese energy conglomerate for the last 2 years of Joe Biden's vice presidency. They were owed money, and the money was not to be paid until after Joe Biden left office. And so, sure enough, here we are in February of 2017, just less than 2 months after Joe Biden's left office, and the first of these $3 million payments has come through to Rob Walker's bank account, and then another one came a couple of weeks later. And within a few days, that money gets dispersed we know from James Comer today, to 4 immediate family members of Joe Biden, and that being his son Hunter, his brother Jim Biden, Hallie Biden, who's the widow of his late son Beau, who at that stage had been having a relationship with Hunter for 2 years since her husband had died. And then there's a 4th family member of the Bidens that James Comer and his oversight committee have not yet been able to find the identity of. It's just named as Biden, but they are subpoenaing those bank records, that bank account, and presumably we'll find that pretty soon, probably early next week. And they're continuing on just following the money. And I think if as Hunter's lawyers and the White House is saying there's nothing untoward about this, then why was this money so laboriously doled out over 3 months in small increments to various members of the family? And why was it given to Hallie Biden, who was a primary school teacher? And did they all pay tax on it? And why was Rob Walker the middleman?
I don't know. I mean, they didn't. It's not like they complained about a drag queen story hour, so the FBI isn't actually interested, apparently, in finding out what happened. Yeah. But I hope all of those questions are answered by Mr. Comer's committee. Miranda Devine, thank you for that update tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tucker.
So there have been a number of bank failures recently, like electricity. We didn't used to have a lot of bank failures, but by our count, there have been 5 recently. Seems like a pattern, no? Maybe a banking crisis? Kevin O'Leary assesses what we're watching straight ahead. Kamala Harris is not a Jeopardy champion. Pretty easy to stump her with the question, but last night she got the easiest possible question and had, well, Fox's Trace Gallagher is going to tell us what happened next. Hey, Trace.
Hey, Tucker, the VP's profile is so low that even her boss, the president, continues to mispronounce her name, calling her Kamala instead of Kamala. Some believe Harris' low profile is by administrative design. Others say it's her choice. And even back when she was the San Francisco DA, Kamala Harris avoided news conferences and interviews at all costs. Even today, one-on-one interviews are given only to friendly outlets, which, as we witnessed on Stephen Colbert, still end up putting the VP in a pickle. Watch.
I know you love Veep.
I do. I love Veep. Is it accurate?
There are bits of it that are actually quite accurate.
What is the actual role on a daily basis as you have found it?
Well, I have the great privilege of serving with Joe Biden, who was president of the United States. Right.
That's an excellent answer. And the question was, what is the job of the vice president?
And your answer is part of the job, I'm guessing.
As for the job of the vice president, even the VP supporters point out the Constitution outlines only 2 roles for vice presidents: take over if the president is unable, and preside over the Senate. Job A has been so far unnecessary, and in Job B, she's been the Senate tiebreaker 26 times. Beyond that, her resume is paper thin. She is the border czar, but as we learned yesterday, the border is unsecure, uncontrolled, and desperately needs a wall. Finally, in the VP's defense, it's very difficult for her to excel at a job that she cannot define. Tucker.
Quite a story. Trace Gallagher, the best, on midnight every evening in the Fox News Channel. Thank you, Trace.
You bet.
So you may have noticed there's something very serious going on with banks in this country, not just in this country, but certainly here as well. Jenny Yellen is the Treasury Secretary, so she went up to Congress today to testify about it. At one point, Yellen said that the trillions of dollars the government has spent, has pumped into the economy, aren't really related to the historic inflation we're now experiencing.
But would you agree those are the top 3 causes of inflation? Deficit spending, high energy costs, and supply dislocations?
I don't believe that deficit spending is one of the main causes.
I don't. By the way, this person was the Fed chairman during quantitative easing for a lot of it. She told us that inflation would be transitory, famously, as a way to justify more spending. Now, she won't admit the effects of that decision. So she was wrong, but she's lying about it. This is not the first time she's been wrong, by the way. Here she was in 2007, 1 year before the Great Recession.
Would I say there will never, ever be another financial crisis? You know, probably that would be going too far, but I do think we're much safer, and I hope that it will not be in our lifetimes, and I don't believe it will be.
Our mistake, that was 2017. Clearly she didn't see this crisis coming. Kevin O'Leary is a Canadian businessman and investor and, of course, TV star, and we're glad to have him join us tonight. Kevin, thanks so much for coming on. So I have 2 concerns. One, that these bank failures aren't just isolated incidents but related to each other. And 2, the people in charge of managing this economy aren't up to the job. Are those things to be worried about?
Well, let's take the bank situation. What's occurred here, when many of these regional banks were founded 40, 50 years ago, it was a different economy, a different world. There was no digital age at all. And people needed the touch point of a bank in their community. Obviously, that's completely changed because 99% of banking today is done online. There's a whole generation of people post-pandemic who have never been in a branch in a regional bank, or any bank for that matter. And so the question becomes now, the narrative's quickly looking at this because of all these failures, what do we need tiny regional banks for in the first place? Because what we're learning is, where are you going to find systemic risk? In a tiny bank that doesn't have scale. So the managers there have to swing for the fences because they're compensated on equity in the bank, stock and stock options. And so the classic case that you've just seen is 2 failures, which these managers weren't, you know, bad managers, they were idiots. So if you think about Silicon Valley Bank, it was run like a hedge fund, a poorly run hedge fund, and Signature, I don't know what that was. That's like a Saturday night cartoon. But you're going to get more and more of this because these banks are under tremendous pressure to be able to compete against what's going on with behemoths. And the truth is, and Tucker, this is a real hard thing.
Wait, may I interrupt you, though, and ask a question? I think you're making a strong case on the basis of math, which I respect. It's inefficient to have these little banks. Why not just have the SIBs? I get it, the big banks. But doesn't that give politicians disproportionate control over our economy? If everyone's banking with 6 banks, doesn't that make Washington much stronger?
You know, everybody is starting to bank with 6 banks because the big 4 right now are taking in billions every day. I was on the phone today with one of them. We're transferring many accounts there because we don't want to take any systemic risk in cash. So why should we keep it in a regional bank? And, you know, people are trying to say that's not happening. It's happening by the billions every day. And many countries have proven that they can run the entire economy on 4 or 5 giant behemoth banks. Now, you may not like the sound of that, that, but that's where we're going. The only question is, when we talk about, First Republic Bank being bailed out by other banks, why are they doing that? First Republic is a zombie bank now. Nobody with significant amounts of capital in a business are going to put a lot of it there. Why would they take that risk? They don't need to. They can simply put it in any bank anywhere that's behemoth and go online and transfer capital, do payroll, get all the same services. This is going to be a political nightmare because you're going to have people saying, oh, we've got to keep all these small operators operating. But the big issue is if you nationalize the deposits and take the risk out of it. So if I'm an idiot manager in a regional bank and I'm compensated with stock, I'm going to put all of my depositors' money on black in Las Vegas.
No, that's right.
What I'm going to do. Yeah, I'm right. I'm going to either double it, and if it goes to zero, no problem for me. I don't have to worry about it because you're going to bail me out. The taxpayer is going to bail me out. This is very messed up. It's not a good situation. And I think Yellen's going to have a lot of trouble explaining this to taxpayers eventually.
I mean, if you liked what Amazon and Walmart did to downtowns across America, you'll love having 4 banks. But I think you make an entirely fair point about backstopping, every deposit in a regional bank. Kevin O'Leary, thank you for your insight and experience on this. Appreciate it.
Take care.
So you would think that when politicians got caught sexualizing children, they would, I don't know, maybe get arrested? No, they got bolder. The lieutenant governor of Minnesota is going farther than we've ever seen a lieutenant governor go. We'll tell you what she said next. It used to be that people who sexualized children got arrested and then hurt in prison. Now they get elected to office. Politicians pushing the sexualization of children and the mutilation of their genitals. Actually happening. In Minnesota, the governor, Tim Walz, just signed an executive order that forces state agencies to ensure gender-affirming care for minors, including all forms of surgery, including castration. So if a child wants to cut off her breasts or take puberty blockers that will destroy her life, cause osteoporosis, other irreversible physical changes, sterility, the state of Minnesota will help them do it. And they're not embarrassed of this at all. The lieutenant governor of that sad state in decline, Peggy Flanagan, said parents have no role whatsoever in the process. You're not the parent to your children. Peggy Flanagan and the creeps who run Minnesota are. Watch this video.
Let's be clear. This is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare.
It's scary. I mean, that video is right out of Jonestown. The breathiness, the intensity, that's a cult member right there. And it's all in this same demographic. Have you noticed that? It's all people exactly like that. Our job as grown-ups is to believe them? Really? Have you been a parent? Kids say all kinds of things. They're impulsive. They're immature. Your job as a parent is to be the parent and to guide children. But the state of Minnesota is making that illegal, and no one seems to notice. Well, as we told you, the criminal trial of Douglas Mackey is the greatest threat to the First Amendment in modern American history. Joe Biden's Department of Justice is prosecuting Mackey for the crime of making fun of Hillary Clinton and her voters with a meme on Twitter in 2016. And for that crime, Biden's DOJ is trying to throw Mackey in prison for 10 years. The trial was postponed this week after a defense witness was intimidated by the Southern Poverty Law Center. James Lawrence is Douglas Mackey's lawyer. He joins us tonight. Mr. Lawrence, thank you so much for coming on. It's hard to believe, just watching from the outside as a non-lawyer, that a case like this could go to trial and that the government could defend trying to throw a man in prison for 10 years for making fun of Hillary Clinton. But that's what's happening.
Well, Tucker, the Biden DOJ is coming up with new ways to criminalize dissent and to attack our constitutional rights. And really, this is a concern to all of us, and that's why I'm asking your viewers to support Doug's legal defense by going on to memedefensefund.com. But let's start at the top. The government is using a statute aimed at the Ku Klux Klan to criminalize political speech in violation of the First and Fifth Amendments. But there's more. The Sixth Amendment grants the right to confront your witnesses in open court. But in this case, the government is going to call a confidential witness against Doug. And that's something that's reserved for people that testify against organizations like MS-13. The court in this case granted the government's request, citing concerns about online harassment. Let's not miss the logic here, Tucker. The logic is that anonymous Twitter accounts are akin to violent criminal organizations. And it just gets worse.
That's right.
It just gets worse. Doug's defense can't cross-examine this confidential witness on this individual's ongoing relationship with the FBI. It's deeply troubling. These are issues that are bedrock. These are, yes.
Wait, may I ask you though? I mean, it seems to me the U.S. Congress should be withholding funding from DOJ over this, or any members of Congress. Other than Marjorie Taylor Greene, I know has been involved in this, but is anybody else coming to your aid on this?
She's the only Republican member of Congress that's raised this issue, and I'm glad you mentioned Congress, Tucker, because no one voted for this, Tucker. Congress has had the opportunity to address election misinformation and disinformation repeatedly, and they refused to do it. But Doug Mackey's on trial over this issue. Tucker, when our leaders talk about our democracy, this is what they mean by it. And that's why I'm asking your audience to not only pray for Doug, but to support his legal defense at memedefensefund.com.
Well, yeah, you have to be allowed to make fun of the people in power, or else, you know, it's not a free country. It's a police state. And I think this needs to be stopped. And I'm so thankful that you're representing him. James Lawrence, the lawyer for Douglas Mackey.
Thank you, Tucker.
So speech has to stay free, period. And that's why the case of Julian Assange, who hurt no one, who was a journalist, who is still rotting in prison, has been for over a decade for journalism, is of such deep interest to anyone who cares about freedom. There's a new documentary on Julian Assange, his father and brother. Join us next. John Shipton is Julian Assange's father. Gabriel Shipton is his brother. Both of them join us now. Thank you both for coming on. So, John, just to you first, the obvious question, are you any closer to getting your son out of prison tonight?
No closer, but we have a rising tide worldwide of support. Every parliamentary democracy in the Western world has an Assange support group within it. And we characterise the previous election of the government in Australia as an Assange government, because each of the successful candidates and the independents and the Greens stood on a platform of bring Assange home to Australia.
So, and he should be. The malice that's been directed toward him tells you a lot about the people directing it. Gabriel, let me ask you, what are the impediments? Who is standing in the way of this, if we could put a finer point on this? Who's preventing your brother from getting out?
Well, the National Security DOJ are the ones who are behind this prosecution of Julian. I think if they would relook at this case and realise that they are prosecuting someone for doing what journalists do every day, publish, or what they should be doing, publishing without fear or favour, then they would realise that this prosecution needs to come to an end, that they should listen to outlets like yours, as well as the New York Times, as well as many other groups, human rights groups, free press groups, and First Amendment advocates, who are all calling for this prosecution to be dropped because of the threat that it poses to the First Amendment in the USA.
I don't understand, John, how politicians can get up and say they support democracy and simultaneously support the imprisonment of a man for telling the population what the government is doing in its name.
I don't understand it myself. You know, the goal of the United States Constitution is, of course, the rights and, of course, fundamentally, the First Amendment. Why they want to truncate their own magnificent gift to humankind has got us beat. But we keep on, and we keep on getting more and more support. I think we've got 52 screenings around the United States with Q&As, so if people come along, they can get the full story and ask a question of anything they doubt or want to know further.
When they get and I can speak for myself, I didn't have the full story. I didn't understand it. Once I looked into it, I wound up on your side. So I hope others take that same step. John and Gabriel Shipton, thank you both very much, and congrats on the film.
Thank you, Tucker.